Soltis Anderson, a columnist at the Washington Examiner and a Republican pollster. Marjorie Clifton is a former consultant for the Obama campaign and a principal of Clifton Consulting. Welcome to both of you. Kristen, to you first. There's been a blurry of activity from this White House. Is this a case of President Trump simply doing what he promised he would do during the campaign? In other words, is he satisfying his base with some of these actions that he is proposing?
Taking action on Dodd-Frank and financial regulation is something that Republicans have been hungry to do for a long time. And so President Trump, by tackling this priority, is doing something that Republicans, it's right in line with something that they've been itching to do. What's going to be interesting is that a lot of folks who voted for Donald Trump for president are not necessarily traditional Republicans, not necessarily limited government types, and in many cases are sometimes skeptical of the financial industry, don't love the big banks. And so for President Trump, he's going to have to make the case for why this is good for economic growth and why it's good for the little guy, why it's the sort of thing that is going to still allow him to make sure that we're doing what financial regulation should be doing and protecting the little guy from things like predatory lending, etc.
I think I heard Marjorie agreeing with at least part of what you had to say there. Go ahead, Marjorie.
I actually agree with all that she's saying. I mean, what the beauty of these times. I think one of the concerns is exactly as Kristen was pointing out is how does this impact the people who voted for him? Because a lot of those people in sort of the pockets of the Midwest and others who come from lower income districts were hit hardest by the subprime market crash in 2008 and 2009. So how is this going to impact their pocketbooks? And a lot of the regulations they're rolling back require the banks and require advisors to give sort of the safest advice to consumers, give them the lowest rates possible on their retirement plans, for example. And what that does is help the average consumer who doesn't understand all the intricacies of the financial market, of the different options out there. So, and I think the other criticism, coming largely from Democrats and others is Trump's cabinet is stacked with people who've come out of the financial services institution, like Cohen coming from Goldman Sachs, and a lot of the advisors that he has are coming out of J.P. Morgan and other banks that will benefit greatly from this. So is it ultimately looking out for the people, as he's claiming? Yeah,
the Dodd-Frank regulations were designed to rein in abuses at banks, Kristen, and, given what Wells Fargo was doing recently, you can see why some of that might be warranted, but the big complaint from the community is that it was the sort of mom and pop banks, the small community banks all over the country, farm country, small towns, small cities. Those are the ones who are really being crushed by the regulations of Dodd-Frank.
And this is all about unintended consequences, that you could be someone who wants to see financial regulation really protect consumers and put forward laws that you think will achieve that, and they wind up having these unintended consequences where you're hurting small banks, or in the case of this regulation that says, you have to, if you're a financial advisor, you have to invest only in the lowest fee options. In some cases that's taking some investment options off the table. So it's all about mitigating these unintended consequences. And I think that's why you have President Trump wanting to take this action so quickly, because even laws and regulations that have good intentions can sometimes go astray when they're implemented.
I'm sure we will hear, Marjorie, that Elizabeth Warren is going to be unhappy with any rollback of Dodd-Frank. But is it possible that when the dust settles and you step back and see what the president intends to do here, that some Democrats might be on board?
Well, I think that there are a lot of people, especially in the middle, who would like to see overhauling and efficiencies put in place. And as Kristen's talking about, the unintended consequences addressed in a lot of these policies, like the Affordable Care Act and like Dodd-Frank. And so I think the question is, are they able to replace? And I think that's a debate you're seeing within Republican circles of, do we just roll back and not replace, or is there an alternative solution we bring to the table? That's where the devil's in the details, and as we've seen in these past policies. And I think the question is, what comes in the future?
Absolutely. All right, Marjorie Clifton, Kristen